Hello, my name's Jeff Jolton. I'm the Director of Consulting at Connexa, an IBM company. Today I'm going to talk to you about telling your story to the C-suite. I've been in the I/O space for the last 20 years and have delivered a number of executive presentations and meetings to leadership around assessment, leadership development, team assessments, and engagement and organizational assessment. So we're going to take some of what I've learned over the last 20 years and share with you today about how you can frame a story, tell it, and really get the leadership to follow through and listen to what you have to say. So the most important thing is to really think about how you want to frame your discussion when talking to the leadership. So you want to go in knowing your purpose. Either to sell an idea, influence a decision or an outcome. Do you want to teach them something new, share an insight and give them new information, or just learn from them by seeking input from them? So you really need to go in with an idea about what you really want to accomplish from this meeting and make sure that you're framing the conversation in light of these purpose and goals. So it should fit that true sense of why you're there. And when you keep your framing in mind when you go in, then the meeting will go a lot smoother and you're more likely to achieve your goals with the leadership. So to kind of help you frame it out, I've put together this matrix for you to work from. So if you're going in to sell, the main thing you really want to make sure you convey a need, why they should buy what you're selling, a sense of value, what you're really bringing to them, and a vision, like how does it fit with their vision, or that you're giving them a vision that they can follow by following through on whatever you're promoting to them. Bring along best practices, share good evidence to the value of what you're talking about, and most importantly, when you're in a sell situation, you really want to build trust with the leadership. Those executives can believe that what you're saying is something that they can really use. You have to be careful about some of the risk. You definitely want to make sure you achieve good credibility when you go into the room. If you don't represent yourself correctly, or you misstate something, or you don't really have the fact to support what you're putting out there, that can affect your credibility. And you may also not go in as prepared as you should be, and your message will get off target. So you want to make sure that you do understand why they're having you come in. If you're in the room to influence the leadership, then you want to make sure that they understand what you're providing. You're providing them a good evaluation of whatever thing you're trying to influence with the message, and always provide at least some kind of recommendation. A lot of people go into the C-suite and they're nervous because they want the executive to make a decision, and they hold back on providing their true recommendation to the leadership. And we would advise that you really go in and say, this is what we think you should be doing. They may disagree with you, but they can appreciate that you're bringing a recommendation forward based on your analysis. So in the strategy around that, make sure you clarify why you believe in what you're stating, provide good evidence to it, and again, another level of trust that you really have done your homework and you know what you're talking about. The risk when you're in an influence situation is that you can provide them too much detail, especially if it's something that you've been looking at the data for a long time, really getting into all that information. We sometimes see that people provide too much detail. So watch for that over-analysis, and then also watch for the opposite, where you provide too little analysis, too little detail, you just kind of come in. So you have to find the right balance when you're talking to the leadership. When you're in a teach situation, the key messages is really about goal of what you want them to learn from the conversation, the impact that having this information will have. So if you're training them in terms of how to be a better leader, or with some key messages about people management, what that should impact in terms of the relationship they have with their team. So provide some sense of, applying what you learn here will have this kind of impact. And then give them a good sense of direction about where the training is going to go, so that, the agenda, the outline, of something that they can follow through so they know where they are in the process. The strategy behind teaching should definitely be providing critical details, giving them a sense of clear application and next steps. So just at that impact, that goes to application. How am I going to use this, and what should I do after this training is over? The risk when you are in a teach situation is that you can come off as being condescending. If you oversimplify your message and play things very plotting, then it may be insulting to the audience that you're teaching to. On the other side of that is when you're a little bit too obtuse and the message isn't clear, that you assume that they know more than they should or do. So it's, again, knowing the audience when you go in, making sure that you really gauge yourself in the situation. If it seems like they're following you along, maybe you can speed things up. If it seems like you're seeing things of confusion, then you might want to re-step and trace back on some of the key messages. When you're in the boardroom to share information, this is usually when you've done some kind of analysis of their results, so it's giving them some insights to take away and apply to their work. So here you're sharing something that you've learned. The strategy here is definitely to help connect them to what you have learned. You may have had a lot of excitement and interest in this. You got to make sure you bring them along for that and really make a key connection there. And also, aligned with that is really how is this relevant to what they're doing, whether to the business strategy or a specific issue that they're trying to work out, decision making that they're trying to resolve. So really make sure you explain the relevance to them. The risk when you're sharing information is to, again, sort of overshare it, to get too redundant. You repeat yourselves again and again and again and just sort of lose sight of that they probably got the first or second time. So make sure you're not redundant. And also, make sure you have a very clear direction. You are following from point A to point B to point C, so you clearly understand the connections that you're trying to make. From a learn perspective, in this case, you're not really presenting. You're there to listen and learn from them, so to get their input on some things. So obviously, the key message here is really not to share any information directly as much as to listen, ask questions, use your expertise to kind of how you want to pull things out, but also what's their expertise, what information do they have, and how you're going to use that information. So really let them be the experts in this situation. Your strategy, of course, is to listen, to reflect on what they're saying, and what I mean that is that reflective listening. So what I think I hear you saying is this, or it seems to me, blah, blah, blah. So make sure that you're making it clear that you understand where they're coming from or that you're really listening as you're going along. And finally, it's to be able to explore, knowing when to prompt into questions a little more deeply, if it seems to be going off track and on track, or if it's something that you really think there's value deeper to probe and get a little deeper. Finally, the risk here is to go in and you are lecturing to them rather than asking questions and listening, so there's no real dialogue. They don't really understand why you're asking them these questions or what you want to learn from them. So make sure that you do set up the situation well, so you know why you're on the call. We have stakeholder interviews, for example, why you're there to learn from them. And sometimes they're the wrong source of information. So make sure that you really know that these people can answer the questions that you need to have answered and learn from them the way you need to. Just a few other pointers just around presenting your data and statistics to leadership, because a lot of us IO psychologists are obviously involved in data and being able to tell the stories from the results that we see. When I've seen leaders, they really are very interested in the information, but first and foremost, they really value simplicity. So give it to me very clearly, give it to me straight. Make sure you're providing a clear headline to everything that you provide. And it's something, when I do my presentation to leaders, I do really try to make it clear what the takeaway is on each page. And that could be part of the headline or just something right off. And again, we get very involved in the numbers, and we are very comfortable sometimes with that language, with the statistics. But make sure when we're in front of leaders and frankly, any non-IO population, you really want to make sure you're talking through the story and not just the numbers. So we're not just saying X, Y, and Z equals X, Y, and Z. You really can say what the consequences are of this or what we've learned from this. Another thing is to make sure that what we're talking about in terms of differences and being significantly different or significantly, statistically meaningful is really practically meaningful as well. So you sometimes may be working with very large organizations and you might have a 1 point difference that's statistically significant, but that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really mean a real change in the experience people have. So make sure you reflect that in the stories that you're telling. Think about different ways to represent results. So like correlations, you might want to represent that graphically, not necessarily scatter graphs. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But make sure you think through what will get that message across quickly. And make sure that you save all the details that you really want them to have, but maybe not have time to share with them, into a paper. So you don't have to get every little detail out in front of them. So just as an example, here's a correlation matrix that we had where we looked at survey data, dimensions along the top to business outcomes, which are along the side. And you can see there's a lot of good information here, a lot of significant relationships. But what we found when looking at this, it's going to be very hard to present all this information in a meaningful way to the leadership. So what we did is we really found out very quickly is that what was the most interest to them. What do they want to know, what matters most to them, and what can they share most readily. So even though they gave us a lot of key business metrics, what we learned was the leadership was most interested in return on sales, ROS. So we really just wanted to get a very clear return on sales message to them. It was an engagement survey, so what we were able to show them very quickly is those groups that were doing really well on engagement and 19% return of sales versus only those 8% to those in the bottom quartile. So they very quickly could see engagement is something that's related to a very key business metric for them. And that's something that's very easy for them to recall as opposed to that whole matrix or a number of significant relationships. Another example is here's a case of logistic regression where we're looking at assessment items predicting voluntary turnover. And again, you put a set of beta coefficients in front of your leadership team, their eyes are going to gloss over. They're not really going to know, well, why are you showing them this? So again, we want to make sure that we are thinking about what's the message we want to get across and what actions and decisions do we want leaders to take. So if we're looking at regression, we might say, well, what we really want to get across is that they understand what is the most predictive factors and what things should they be working on to reach, or in this case, reduce turnover, or whatever the goal might be. So you might do something like this, where instead of showing the true beta scores, here we just show bubble sizes to reflect the effect size. So the larger the bubble means there's a greater influence or prediction on the outcome. So they can see regular career direction has the most impact on predicting voluntary turnover, or reducing turnover, then training, and then least in this case was pay satisfaction. So we can really get that message across in a very simple way that they can remember. So whenever you're looking at the statistic to the executives, you want to think about maybe representing the statistics in ways that they can take away and remember. So a couple of last minute pointers. When you're talking about the deck and the story, as I mentioned, keep it clear, keep it simple. Those headlines that you put out there should be the takeaways. Every slide that you put in front of a leader should have something that they can take away from. If it's just nice to know, it doesn't really add to one of the things that you're framing, one of your key purposes, get rid of it or stick it in the appendix. You don't have to present it. When you're looking at statistics and you can monetize the results, which means put it in terms of dollars and cents or pounds and pence, then you should do so. So if you're able to show that, training people more reduced waste and turnover, and that save $200 billion a year, then you want to get that out there. Even if it's an estimate, it's a good way of helping them understand the impact. When you're trying to put in bullets and headlines, one of the best practices out there is just try to keep it to 2 lines of text at maximum. Avoid a lot of eye charts, with a lot of text and tables. If you really have to put together a really detailed chart, give them the report that they can look at, and then put the highlights of the key things that you want them to take away from that eye chart on the presentation and let them look at the data directly in front of them. And then if you really feel the need to geek out and have every little nuance that you want to share with them that you won't have time to, go ahead and put together a paper or an appendix that has all those details. And then, finally, just your demeanor going into these executive presentations or meetings or discussions. You're going usually invited in as an expert. And one of the things that's always been very helpful for me is to remember that expertise is really about knowing what to share, not sharing everything you know. So being judicious can be very helpful in actually elevating their opinion of you and why you're in the room. So with that, make sure you have a real clear focus on the message you want to share. Again, need to know versus nice to know. Think about these three questions. Does it support your key message? Does it lead to an action or a decision? If it doesn't lead to an action or decision, it's probably nice to know. And will it get your discussion off track? Sometimes there's information that you probably want to get out there. It's not critical to the discussion, but leads them down something else that you really don't want to get off into. So if you know there's some sensitive areas, you may want to frame that differently so that you don't get distracted from the real purpose of why you're in the room. Always be prepared for questions, and don't be afraid of getting challenged. That's actually, for me, one of the things I really enjoyed when they kind of get a little bit of a give and take in the situation. That means that they're really engaged, that they feel this is important. If you're well prepared, you should be able to follow through, answer the questions, accept the challenge. And if you don't know something, it's okay to say, I don't know it. Here's how I'm going to find out for you and get back to them. And again, if we think about presentations, we tend to use that word a lot, but I encourage my consultants and other people I work with to think about dialogue rather than a presentation. Really look at this as an opportunity for an interaction, to talk to the leadership, let them talk back. That becomes more engaging to them and more likely to leave a lasting impression. And finally, be confident. Just go into the room and be confident about the conversation. Some people are very easily intimidated by the fact they're talking to you, senior executives, and in cases, the boss's boss of their organization. It's important, though, to remember they're people. You know what you're talking about, and there's no reason why you can't. Be confident as long as you're prepared when you go into the room. So thank you.